Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this joint session of the Polar Research Board. I'm April Melvin on the Polar Research Board staff. I'm just going to provide a few housekeeping slides before turning it over to our board members to start the session. And I know how to use the clicker, but not start them in the room. Okay, so we do encourage, if you have your computer with you and would like to join via Zoom, we would like to use, then you will have access to the chat function and raising your hand. We also will take hands in the room. We encourage, if you are online, to stay muted unless you are speaking, and we have some mics in the room that will be circulating. When you do ask a question, please state your name and your affiliation before you ask your question. Given how many people are in the room, we're not going to do a round of introductions before we get going. And I just wanted to bring your attention to the ASSW Code of Conduct that we are following for this meeting, that we are committed to maintaining a safe, welcoming, productive, and trusted space for all participants to engage in dialogue, and ask that you honor that throughout your participation in this meeting. And I'd now just like to turn it over to our board chair, Martin Jeffries, to provide a brief welcome, and then we'll get the session going. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, April, and welcome everybody. This is an open meeting, hence we have people, wallflowers at the back of the room there. But don't be a wallflower, please jump in if you have something valuable, constructive, or otherwise to say. And we do have quite a number of people joining us remotely via Zoom, and we'll try to keep track of them and their wishes to speak. Please raise your yellow hand, those on Zoom who want to say something, and we will get to you as soon as we can. So this is an open session, and the purpose really is to talk about international cooperation, collaboration in polar research. And I stress polar. There are 2 polar regions, and we have an International Polar Year beginning to take shape, a lot of work to do yet. But what we hope by the end of this session is to leave here with the international organizations who have joined us, and welcome and thank you for coming to meet with us and talk with us today. We really appreciate it. But we hope to leave with a better understanding of our individual organizations, who we are, how we work, what we're able to do, and then what then could we do together and with others to facilitate, support, perhaps improve international collaboration in polar research, and particularly with a view to the International Polar Year number 5, where obviously we need to be cooperating to address big questions that we need cooperation, that no single country or organization can find the answers and solutions alone. So I'm going to hand it over now to Kristen St. John. Kristen is with James Madison University in Virginia. Kristen.
Thanks very much, Martin, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm going to reiterate some of the points that Martin made. To develop a successful 5th International Polar Year, it's really valuable to put effort into establishing new and strengthening existing relationships among experts and among organizations that will participate in that program. And the goal really is to lead towards coordination and collaboration. So for today's session, we're going to first receive an update on planning for IPCY5 from the president of the International Arctic Science Committee. And that will be followed by brief presentations by international and regional polar organizations. And there'll be opportunity for discussions in ways to support IPY5 towards that collaboration and coordination. So first, Henry, thanks very much for being here. Henry Burgess will be speaking first. He's the president of the International Arctic Science Committee. Thanks.
Is it just the arrows?
Should just be the arrows. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Advance the slides. Does it show you just the arrows? Great. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Henry Burgess. I'm the president of the International Arctic Science Committee, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I'm sorry you haven't got Gerlis Fugman, who is our executive secretary. Gerlis has come down with a shocking cold, so she's asked me to step in. So you've got the second string linebacker rather than the MVP quarterback, but I will do my best. I recognise there are a lot of colleagues that I know well in the room here, and also many people that have been involved a lot in IPY planning. So this is an overview about kind of where we are. This is not the definitive statement about the be-all and end-all of IPY, and I look forward to the discussion. I also wanted to say thank you very much to the National Academies, because together with the University of Boulder, Colorado, and others in the local organizing committee, you are putting on ASSW 2025. I know from an IAS perspective, that is not an easy role. I did it last year in Edinburgh. So thank you very much to the National Academies for all your support. That's very much appreciated. So I'll try and do this quite quickly to give us enough time for a kind of discussion and kind of comments. But if it looks like I'm going too long, Kristen, just wave at me, please. Many of you will know this is the 5th IPY. This comes on the back of a tradition of 4 previous IPYs starting in 1882-83, and the most recent one was in 2007-8. We decided as an international community several years ago that we would not wait another 50 years after 2007. The need was pressing, and also the opportunities were pressing. And so we thought it was a good idea to do this after 25 years from the last one, not 50 years. Each of the IPYs has had its own character, its own theme. There's a great presentation that David and others will be able to give you about kind of the history of the IPYs, but that perhaps isn't the place for this now. But the 5th IPY builds on the previous research and science and international collaboration, but it's also will build on the millennia of Indigenous peoples' knowledge production. And we hope to do that in as collaborative and as co-productive way as possible. So we started the planning for IPY5 very early in 2021 with some discussions among several international organizations, particularly with SCAR, IASC sister organization in Antarctica. And that was deliberate because we wanted to make sure that right from the very start, we gave ourselves enough time for the IPY. I wasn't around and working in the polar regions for the last IPY, but one of the things people have said to us is that although it was extremely successful, it would have been even more successful if there had been some more lead-in time, and we've been able to talk to the funding agencies, and we've been able to make some more of those kind of connections, even more than actually happened. So for that reason, we wanted to start early. We also wanted to start early because there is so much more attention now on the polar regions, not least at international conferences and events. Every Arctic country has its own big Arctic conference, and many others as well. And people are already beginning to talk about IPY and other initiatives. And we wanted to make sure that we started it early, and we started it in the right mood and the right tone, so that it was the international organizations, those that had worked on the previous one and before, that had the kind of the guiding arm with this. We know, of course, that national organizations, funding bodies will have an absolutely vital key role to play, but we wanted to start this off with international organizations rather than with national ones. So you can see there kind of statements in 2022, concept note in 23, and then updated again in 24. And we have the concept note here, which was updated a month or so ago. There are some on the side, and also if you go to the registration area, you can pick up some more of these. Virtually everything I will say today is in this concept note, which is also online. So please do have a look at this.
Yes, the concept note. We also have a website, ipy5.info, and we now have a logo as well. You will see on the bottom of the concept note all the organizations that are involved in the planning group, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. In terms of the planning timeline, we are coming into the kind of the consultation phase. There's lots of structure been set up already, and I will talk about that, but it's not the structure that's most important in IPY, it's what we're actually going to do. And this idea of the timeline is to give people a sense of the activities that will happen, what's happening already, and then what will come. Those of you that have heard me give this presentation before will have heard me say that the most important thing, I think, on this timeline is that ramp up period, that arch kind of top right. So IPY is 2 years for 32-33 to give us an Antarctic and an Arctic field season and more besides. But it's not just only activity in those 2 years. It's intended to be a ramp up of activity, a peak in those years, and then a legacy on beyond, in the same way that the last IPY has had a legacy, and then we're hoping to build on that with this one. We're not calling it a decade of IPY because I don't think all the decades that there have been so far have been super successful, and we wanted to focus people's attention on these 2 years, give ourselves time to get it right, but recognize that there is work that can start now and that is valuable, that can report in those 2 years and will carry on beyond. You can see that we've highlighted within the document some of the other initiatives that are happening. We know IPY doesn't take place in isolation. That's not the intention. So we've highlighted the various other initiatives that there are, including the UN Decade of Action for Cryospheric Sciences. Yeah. Apologies, I'm using Gerlis's slides. We've also highlighted here some of the big initiatives that we already know will be happening. So Arctic Pulse, Antarctic in Sync, and Arctic Ocean 2050, which is a big Norwegian-led initiative. These are either already happening or are on the verge of happening. And we wanted to give people a sense, even at this early stage, of the scale of initiative that we're looking for within the IPY. It's not to say that everything has to be at this enormous scale. Other things will be, of course, welcome as well, but we wanted to make sure that we were name checking and giving credit to these initiatives already, and where we can, putting our shoulder to the wheel to make them successful as well. On an Arctic side, which is where I speak from mostly, it's important to know that the ICARP process, International Conference on Arctic Research Planning, which is a once every 10-year process, which gives us Arctic science priorities. The hope, the expectation, the reality is that that will feed into the Arctic side of understanding IPY. So this is on the Arctic side, but it will give us a range of science priorities that we hope will be taken up by the IPY and the community and then made live in the years of the IPY. It's not to say that everything, excuse me, on an Arctic side has to be within ICARP. But I think if ICARP is as successful as it's going to be, I'm sure we'll find that is a really good spur to some of the science questions that the IPY will cover. So a little bit about the planning structure, because it's important, but I don't want it to take over. So we have an IPY executive committee, which is the kind of the top level, if you like, which is International Arctic Science Committee. That's myself and Gerlis. SCAR, the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research. So that's Chandrika, the Executive Secretary, Chandrika Nath, and Gary Wilson, who's the President of SCAR, the WMO and the ISC, and then we also have help, very welcome, from the University of the Arctic in that group. And then we have a wider planning group, all the logos you can see there, of international organizations that are taking on the detailed work of planning the IPY. They'll be meeting in a couple of weeks' time for their latest meeting, and we're really looking forward to that. We're making sure it will be 2 meetings in 2 time zones to make sure we get the full range of people, particularly north and south. And all these kind of initiatives need a secretariat, and we have one at the moment, which is an interim secretariat, which is Gerlis and Chandy from SCAR, and then very valuable help from International Science Council and hopefully WMO in the future. It's an open call to join the planning group. We started off with a good group of people and organizations, and that group is building. There's no limit to the size of that group, although we need to keep it manageable, but there isn't a set kind of number of people that can be on it. But it is international organizations and regional organizations. We're not looking for individual universities or individual research councils or similar bodies. There will be a time, hopefully not too much longer, when we have a national committee of national points of contact, and when we can bring in that national level. But this planning group is for international organizations and similar bodies. It is really important, and I stress this whenever I speak, that the International Polar Year is and is perceived as being genuinely an international polar year. So, but I mean that it's as much Arctic as it is Antarctic. The Arctic community is incredibly active in the conferences and the events and the initiatives. I've never worked in a place that is better connected and where there's more interest. But in all of this work, absolutely all the way through it, in all the documents we produce, in the website, in everything that we do right from the very start, we have been in lockstep with SCAR to make sure that this is absolutely a polar year, not an Arctic year with some polar bits added on. And that is really, really important. It's also important that this is an international polar year. So it's not a North American polar year. It's not a European polar year. We recognize where the impetus has come in the past and where the success and the contributions have come, and we hope those will come again. But this is an international polar year for every country that wants to take part in it, that has something to offer and some way to benefit. I don't think we're as skilled yet as we could be in making that actually happen, but it is our commitment, and I think we have long enough to make it happen in the time between now and 32, 33. This really should be for everyone that wants to take part. How to get involved. If you have an organization that you think should be in the planning group, then please do apply. And if we can include you, we will. And we also have a range of task groups which are taking on specific jobs within the planning group. There is one on country and funders, there is one on outreach and engagement, and there are a variety of others that are being developed as well, including on Indigenous involvement. The number of those task groups isn't set. If we need extra ones, then we can have them, and they will do some of the detailed planning work. We had an informal meeting of the country and funders group yesterday, and that was very helpful. And that group will continue its work, and that will be the group that begins to make those connections with funders, that sets up the kind of national committees and the structures. Some countries have already set up an IPY national committee. Norway has been very advanced in doing that, and so they have a system and a structure already. In the UK, we have a national committee, but we've not made it incredibly active as yet. That's still kind of coming through. So at some point, countries will want to think about having a national committee or a national point of contact, but that will be for the countries themselves to decide. Okay, I think I will finish up here. The one thing I would say is that we are thinking about what more support we need as a secretariat. So we don't need more support than we absolutely have to have at the moment, but we are doing this part-time amongst different organizations, which is working at the moment. But I think as IPY builds, then we'll need some more dedicated secretariat time, whether that is it based in one place or a dispersed secretariat with different models, still to be decided. But there will be a time and an opportunity for countries and organizations to contribute people and time into that process to make it a success. And if you would like to contact us, you can welcome to use this email address. I have to say it goes straight to Gerlis's email, so you can use Gerlis's email just the same. But it also goes to Chandy in SCAR as well. So thank you very much for your time, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Henry. That was a very valuable starting point to frame the ongoing discussions that we'll have later this morning. Henry's able to stay up until the lunchtime, and so we're going to have some more talks in just a moment here, and then there'll be a time for open discussion where you could ask questions of any of the presenters and of each other. So unless there's a clarifying question for what Henry described, we'll move on. Okay, fantastic. The next part of our morning session is a focus where we're going to have some briefings from national and regional polar organizations. These are some of the organizations that Henry was pointing to, in fact, on one of his slides for the planning groups. And there'll be 4 organizations presenting, or representatives from 4 organizations presenting, and they represent different regions around the world, which was really fantastic to get this international perspective. So each will give a brief overview of their organization and discuss their current thinking about IPY5. Note too that there are descriptions of the organizations included in the briefing materials and on the event website. So each presenter will have about 10 minutes to present, and if there's clarifying questions, we may have time for that. Otherwise, we'll leave most of the longer questions and discussions after all 4 presentations are complete. So, all right, so we're going to get started. Our first presenter, thank you, is Maria Grigoriou. She is the Executive Secretary of the European Polar Board.
Yes, hello everyone here and online. Thank you very much to April and the US Research Polar Board for organizing this event. I will just give an overview of EPB, and I will finish with some ideas or perspectives as we were asked on how EPB could contribute to IPY, but I want to stress that we haven't decided yet as a member, so we cannot have any official statements yet. So the European Polar Board, how do I turn this? Okay. We have more than 25 years of experience gathering national voices and connect regional initiatives to global efforts. Since December 2024, we were based in the Netherlands, but since January 2025, we moved to Umeå in Sweden. And here, just want to say a little bit about the land we work. The EPB Secretariat is situated at Umeå University campus. Before the campus was built in 1965, there it was part of the winter grazing land of the Sami reindeer herders of Rome. By recognizing this history, we acknowledge that we're in Sapmi, on traditional Sami land, and we honor the past, present, and future generations of the Sami people. Our mission is to enhance European coordination in Arctic and Antarctic research through improved information sharing, optimized infrastructure use, and joint initiatives between the members. And our vision is to have a unified yet diverse European polar voice, where the members can still bear their own national priorities reflected in a collective effort. So some examples: the members with the discussions, they try to identify existing initiatives and how can we unite them, fill maybe some critical gaps, and when possible, integrate some national capabilities into a shared strategy. We also have a strong interest in the science policy interface as organization, and we want to help to make science relevant to the society and for the society to show the relevance of science. Our strategy, our current strategy is based on 3 pillars of collaboration, coordination, and communication between the members. Our strengths: first, we start with a compositive and comprehensive diverse membership. We have 31 organizations from 22 countries across Europe, and our members include research institutes, logistic operators, funding agencies, scientific academies, and governmental ministries. We have a strong bipolar vision. We care equally for Arctic and Antarctic. And all our members together, they hold a lot of polar infrastructures when it comes to vessels, aircraft, and field facilities. We also like to connect the European voice with international partners. And here's some examples of some international partners that we have dialogues and we work together. And since 2017, we have some action groups that they there to serve as to provide some advice or recommendations to the members in the plenary, and even deliver some actions on behalf of the members. We have an action group on polar infrastructure or international cooperation, where in the past we collaborate with some regional forums and polar groups, and an action group on environmental impacts of polar research and logistics. Here I want to give an example of a project that was that one of our action groups contribute, and it's part of one very big EU project we have called EU Polar Net, And it's PolarDex, which is a tool for polar scientists and planners. And this platform lists key polar infrastructures in both Arctic and Antarctic. Now moving from the European field to more EU field, because this is not the same. EBB also participates in some EU projects, funding research projects, mostly on the element of science policy interface and science communication and dissemination. Here's some examples of some past and ended projects. Here I want to say it's EU PolarNet. There is a typo there. And EBB is also one of the coordinators of the EU Polar Cluster, that it's a really nice collaborative effort that brings all the EU polar funding projects together to coordinate and join forces and interact with policymakers. Continuing in the EU environment, since January 2025, the European Polar Board hosts the European Polar Coordination Office. It's a new initiative, and it builds on the results of the 2 successful EU PolarNet projects and aims to continue the legacy of the projects. The purpose is to function as a central contact point for the European polar research community, policymakers, and decision makers, including the European Commission. Here I want just to briefly give some examples of what the European Polar Coordination Office will do. I will maintain and continue the EU Polar Cluster that I mentioned before, and another very important platform that we have in the EU, which is the Catalyst platform. And this action will help EU the EU countries to better coordinate their efforts, to continue doing some research prioritization exercises, how we can better connect polar observation actors, and how we can unite together to facilitate and optimize collaboration. And this is the officer of the EU Polar Coordination Office will try to coordinate all these activities. Here, just want to briefly give this example of the Catalyst platform. So if you join online, you can become a member, register, and then you can join discussions if you want, and you can also use a lot of different tools we have that it's related to different stakeholders, and you can find a lot of resources of EU projects related to both poles. So now a little bit about EBB and IPY. First, I want to say that our EBB members decide their contribution to IPY. And we have some EPB members that are also they're also part of the planning committee as national or organization representatives. The EPB as an organization is being represented at IPY also through the executive secretary, and we're a member of the planning committee and the tax group 1, which is focusing on vision and priorities for IPY. And as I said before, we're not in a position to share official statements because we haven't agreed on those yet, but some perspectives on how EPB might contribute to IPY as an organization is to promote the IPY actions and guidance on how countries can contribute. We know that all our members will contribute in one way or another at IPY, but not maybe all on the same level for all actions. So the EPB can act as this communication bridge between IPY and all the EPB members to make sure that the members overall have a good understanding and following the updates. And also we want to help to bring awareness and engagement campaigns with a strong bipolar focus. And we have this capacity at EPB because we care a lot for both poles. Thinking a little bit also how maybe the European Polar Coordination Office can contribute to IPY. Again, we cannot say official statements because the members have not agreed on that yet. But as I mentioned before, this office will help a lot to coordinate the EU actions. So EPB and EPCO can also contribute to IPY by coordinating and communicating and promoting the European polar voice. Maybe we'll have the opportunity to organize some actions with IPY or other European project bodies, EU funding projects, and international partners, mostly with a focus on science policy interface and bringing awareness about the importance of IPY. we can maybe in the longer run, maybe we can also contribute to some actions towards research prioritization and facilitate actions for enhanced collaborations. This is something that EPB is experienced to. All the members are also experienced on that, and EPCO will also work on, for that for the EU level. And the European Union cares a lot about promoting early careers in discussions, and we're also working a lot with APEX, which is an outcome from the previous APY. So we will try to see how we can also promote and support the active participation of early careers. So that's from me, and I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you very much, Maria. That's great. Thank you. I think we'll move to our next speaker and we can have questions a little later. David Hick will be speaking next. He is the Chief Scientist and Vice President for Research at Polar Knowledge Canada.
Okay, I think we're all set up here. Nice to see everyone, and thank you so much to the U.S. Polar Research Board for the opportunity to join the meeting today and this session. I want to say a little bit about Canadian perspectives, and particularly from a Polar Knowledge Canada perspective, which I'll introduce in a minute. But also, I'll finish talking about IPY and where we are in terms of our preparations. I think both Henry and Maria have sort of alluded to this. This isn't a race. We all have to cross the finish line together, but we're starting at different points. And some of us have different capacities, different experience, and we'll present different opportunities. And we're at that stage right now where I think it's really critical that we sort of look at the interest and capacity and how we can build that up across our entire community, our entire polar community. So this isn't moving, so. That's good. Okay, thank you. So just in terms of a broader Canadian Arctic context, there's a lot of sort of developments that are I think worth considering as you think about the role that Canada will play and the role that Canada will be playing ourselves in the future of Arctic research. And it's all very positive. In December last year, we had a new Arctic foreign policy. For a number of years, we've had an Arctic and Northern policy framework that was co-developed with the North and with Indigenous organizations and rights holders across Northern Canada that really provides a very broad guidance for how we approach not just research, but the governance and the development of the Canadian Arctic. And organizations like the National Inuit organizations, ITK, have also over the last few years articulated very clearly expectations for engagement of researchers and research organizations in Inuit Nunangat, and the same applies across Northern Canada. And the drivers, of course, for all of this are rapid environmental changes, particularly the cryosphere, permafrost, sea ice, and all those things. Canada is a very large country. The geographic, the governance, and social context vary from place to place, and I'll say more about that in just a sec. And really, the focus has been on learning how to co-develop and co-implement priorities that benefit all of the country, but particularly focusing on people living in the North. The other thing I just want to highlight is that there are ongoing investments in research infrastructures across Northern Canada. Research stations, our national shipbuilding program is providing new ice-capable vessels to both the Royal Canadian Navy and the Coast Guard. And the Canadian Space Agency has working with other national space agencies around the world to develop Earth observing capabilities that should be available for the next International Polar Year. And I just want to highlight the lead time that's needed in preparing infrastructures that will support whatever we want to do to advance an IPY program. So that's sort of context. In terms of Polar Knowledge Canada, I won't say too much about this, but we're a relatively new federal government organization that was created 10 years ago as a by an act of parliament that sort of brought together a number of existing organizations like the Canadian Polar Commission with a very broad mandate in terms of helping to advance research activities, disseminate research, and with a mandate not just across northern Canada, but in the circumpolar regions in the Arctic and the Antarctic. We're headquartered in Cambridge Bay on Victoria Island in Nunavut, and we have what I'll call regional offices in Ottawa and most recently in Whitehorse. I like to think about Ottawa as a region, as a regional office. And in terms of our staff complement, we have just over 100 people working for the organization, 4 in Yukon, about 30 in Cambridge Bay. There's real constraints on how many people we can have in Cambridge Bay, availability of housing and things like that. 59 people in Ottawa, and from coast to coast to coast, we have staff across the country, which is we see as a real advantage, although obviously working across the country is a challenge. The Canadian High Arctic Research Station is our headquarters, and from the very beginning, it was really its operations were intended to prioritize many ways of knowing. And in the operation, since really the end of COVID, when we've been fully operational in that capacity, we've really been focusing on how to strengthen that collaboration partnership with the North. So, I think there's a lot of sort of learning that's gone on in our experience as an organization. This is a photograph of Cambridge Bay showing CHARS, or the Canadian High Arctic Research Station, just on the edge of town. And just a close-up of the facilities. We can house about 50 people on site. As I said, we've been at capacity pretty much year-round since spring of 2022. And about a third of our researchers are international. And they come primarily from the United States, or at least since 2018, from the United States and South Korea, but from a large number of countries as well, including, not recently, but previously China and Russia. The other thing we do is try to provide tools and resources, because one of the things, and I just want to touch on this briefly, international researchers coming to Northern Canada often struggle to find the point of contact for accessing the Canadian Arctic. And I just want to touch on this for a minute, because we've done a lot of work to try to put resources and tools together. These have been shared obviously with Interact and with Polar In, but there's a variety of different points of entry into the Canadian Arctic, depending what sort of work and where that work is taking place. And it's very region specific, because the responsibilities for permitting and licensing and for decisions about whether research is welcome or not, and how that research can be co-developed, depends who you need to partner with. And there's a lead time that's needed to do that. So one of the other advantages of this lead up to an IPY, as we develop a larger program, collaborative programs, is that we can actually build those relationships with the regions, with Indigenous organizations, with partners in the North that are going to strengthen and improve the research that we're proposing. And we have a number of good examples of how that's happened with Henry and the CNOOC program with UKRI over the last few years, with the Nordforce call, and there will be other opportunities to do that as well. But I just really want to emphasize from a Canadian perspective, there's no single point of entry. It takes time to build those relationships, to support and build the research programs, but it's very important that we do that. And we've also, been thinking about the good practices, right? And I know this is a big part of the ICARP 4 program here as well. It's important for IASC, but really thinking about, what are good relationships? And there's a number of things worth looking at that sort of are, again, entry points, but also reflections on what learning looks like. And really, improving those understandings over time. Okay, very briefly for Polar Knowledge Canada, we have a small but mighty science and technology program. We're a hub for research. We are working to expand our knowledge mobilization to different audiences. We're a point of contact for partnership and collaboration with both domestically and with the rest of the world, and real emphasis on capacity building, particularly for Indigenous young people and youth. In Nunavut, over a third of the population is under 18. So the future here isn't here already, and we need to keep that in mind. In terms of our science and technology thematic areas of focus, these are, I think, very much map onto broad areas of interest across Northern Canada, but focusing on biodiversity and climate change, food security, sovereignty, and safety, or sort of taking a One Health approach to species that are harvested, or food security within communities, strengthening that. And then cold climate innovation, a lot of things that could work in the north need to be adapted to cold climates, and with a real focus on clean energy technologies. And we do this through our in-house expertise, through in-kind support, primarily at CHARS, but also in other ways. Through research grants, we have a relatively small grants program, but it's very flexible, and we use that to leverage other funding partners, and through building collaborative partnerships. The knowledge mobilization piece is really important, and we welcome partnerships to share information through our channels, or in collaboration, a variety of different ways of doing that. And in particular, in building those relationships in the community. So for a lot of the wildlife health work, for example, that's done in collaboration with harvesters, with elders, with youth, in our facilities, on the land, and with the experts that exist within government agencies or at universities. Try to summarize some of that information into infographics and things that can be shared. I'm showing the English version here, but we try to ensure these are translated into languages that are appropriate in different regions of the north. When there's issues that emerge, we try to provide current and useful information around things like highly pathogenic avian influenza, migratory waterfowl, and it's starting this time of year, the geese are flying north, the ducks are flying north, the eggs, meat are harvested, and involving again, hunters and community members in partnerships for monitoring, but also to ensure food safety is really important. We've been able to share some of this in the Antarctic community as well, because in the last 2 years, I think, as you're all aware, HPAI has become a critical issue for Antarctic research as well. So the priority is really on, co-conceiving, co-designing from the very earliest stages, the types of research activities that we want to develop, and there's lots of mechanisms for doing that. In terms of our international activities, we're a point of contact, work that Canada does, Arctic Council. We sit on the Arctic Science Funders Forum, and previously we're coordinating Canada's work at the ASM. IASC, UArctic, Interact, FARO, and similarly in the Antarctic with our support for Canada's work at ATCM and CEP, SCAR, and COMNAP. And we maintain a number of bilateral memorandum of understanding with other national polar programs that provide sort of an umbrella framework for developing and helping to support collaborative research activities. Just highlight, we tried during the last International Polar Year to have an Antarctic program in Canada. 2 days ago, our first Canadian Antarctic research expedition just returned to Punta Arenas, and this was possible because we now have currently four new Arctic offshore patrol vessels. This is the Margaret Brook, and these are science-capable vessels, and we're hoping on an annual basis now to be able to be present in the Antarctic more than we have been in the past as well. In terms of IPY, the last IPY, Canada had a fairly large program, and we really aren't at a point now where we have developed a national committee or a plan for the IPY. But I just want to stress that our IPY program is going to be a continuum. It's not going to be a pulse. And I think that's one of the lessons from last time is that ramp up needs to be very deliberate, and it needs to be focused on a number of things that contribute to those focal years in 32, 33. And that's something we're very interested in working with other partners on. And one piece of that Henry mentioned is Arctic Pulse. I won't say much about it now, but tomorrow there is going to be a conversation about Arctic Pulse in 348. But this is really looking at that ramp period and how we can bring a bunch of resources together, including with international partners. So looking ahead, collaboration is absolutely essential, and how we do that and how we initiate that and how we conduct ourselves leading up to IPY and through IPY. There's just tremendous opportunities, and very happy to talk in more detail about some of the possibilities that are emerging for the IPY as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. I'm sure we'll have questions, but we'll hold off on them for right now. Our next speaker is coming to us from the Asian Forum on Polar Science. Thamban Miloth is the chair of that organization, and we're very happy to have him.
Thank you. Thank you, April, for inviting me to this important meeting of the polar boats. As you are aware, actually, that the Asian Forum on Polar Sciences is something quite of a nearly about 20-year-old body. And I'm representing that today here as its current chair. Myself is Thamban Miloth, the director of the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research in India. And I'm also the member of this WMO's Executive Council panel on polar high mountain research observations and services. We call it as EC4s. And as you are aware, actually, that WMO is quite active in the past IPY, as well as going to be very important player in the future one. And also, I'm tomorrow I think I can see that. The WCRP is a click, is being represented by Amy Lovecraft is going to be here. I'm again a member of that, click body. So as you can see in this picture, there's been a lot of photographs rather, and also these logos of the institutions involved. Yeah, so FOPS is about, as I mentioned, it's only about 20 years old institution. And there are about 6 full members now to this body, and with countries like China, Japan, South Korea, India, and Malaysia are being the members, as well as there are several invitees and observers. And the palette is increasing year after year. There have been a strong interest from some of these, even the countries like UAE has created a new polar boat, which they're on. So there is a strong national interest in various of these countries to undertake the polar research. I think that's going to be the huge, I would say, probably potentially a game changer in the coming IPY5, because there's been a significant increase in our ability to do research in polar regions, as well as the actual effort itself, because there is a strong national support to these polar programs in these countries, because Asia has become one of the most vulnerable part of this the whole planet, and there is a strong scientific basis to say that this Antarctic, especially Arctic climate change, is showing to be an extremely important, as well as implications for the Asia's weather systems, especially like this monsoon systems and so on. The Arctic sea ice is found to be an extremely important player in that. And therefore, it's also have the research in polar regions does have a societal and economic impact. And it's also one statement which I just added just last night. In fact, Asia is also now one of the home to one of the biggest polar research activities, which is ever-growing research activities with the multiple polar research vessels and the stations, and in Antarctic, mostly, in fact, quite a large presence in Antarctic, but also increasing presence in Arctic and so on. And of course, we are also been very much involved in the Antarctic treaties and SCAR, COMNAP, IASC, etc., and also the increasing presence into the FARO, which is the kind of the counterpart of the COMNAP in Arctic. So if you look at the FOPS itself, its operations, basically we have a annual general meeting, which is hosted by the chair. The chair is kind of a rotating system. Every 2 years, the chair changes. And we also have special meetings. In fact, yesterday we had an half-day special meeting of this FOPS. All the available members, as well as those on online, and which came up with also very quite significant, the decisions on actually how we should be going ahead and approaching the IPY5. So, for example, you have this, the next AGM is going to happen in Goa, in India. So that's the time actually we're also going to keep a half-day brainstorming session, actually how we are going to contribute to the IPY5 as a community, as a regional body. So that's something actually I think I look forward to it, actually better outcome of it. And the FOPS committee itself comprises representatives. Representatives, the national, the main peak contact for those members. And then there are also coordinators who are on the slightly on the mid-level researchers who are able to find time to interact and find ways and means. And always, all the decisions are by consensus. That's something which when the FOPS when it's created, that's how it is. And it's a rotating chair, as mentioned. Currently, the NCPR, my institution, is the chair of that. Very importantly, actually, for the first time, earlier there was a lack of permanent secretariat, which was actually creating a kind of a hindrance to creating a legacy of the activities we carry out, as well as some countries do better when they have secretariat. Some of them may not be doing so. There should be there was a need for a common secretariat, and finally we have one. Now, the Polar Research Institute in China has offered to give 6 years, of secretariat, actually, which will make a significant impact. I can also see online, or the secretariat is already present here. So they are learning the kind of process which we should be following the international other bodies. So, or if you ask me, the most important activities, we have a lot of research collaboratives, the regional collaborations, the bilateral, multilateral, and projects, joint field campaigns in Antarctic and Arctic, more in Antarctica, and the joined the special publications and journal publications and the special volumes and so on. And of course, there are some science symposia and so on. There is a strong what you call manpower exchange, actually, especially the early career researchers for the schemes for fellowships, like each of these countries come with their own thing, which gives a flavor to the FOPS, joint workshops and training programs, like some countries with a very more developed, the polar programs actually are also giving training to the countries which does not have any polar programs and so on. So there is a kind of a community feeling which has been developed over the last 20 years, because when it started, unlike if you look at the European, the community, polar community, actually, Asia is not a kind of a, it's very heterogeneous, community actually out there. So it required a lot of, efforts and time of some of those senior people who, thought that, it is possible to have such kind of thing in Asia. And over the last 2 decades, it has grown. There's also quite a strong intergovernmental organizational cooperation from the FOPS to the rest of the organization in the world. So one important activity which we carry out, the capacity building, as I said, there are invitation fellowships and the different short-term visit and so on, which is supported by various the institutions which have that particular schemes. Like NIPR had this invitation programs. The SCOPRI, which is the Korean Polar Institute, actually have a fellowship programs, and there are also several bilateral and multilateral MOUs existing. And overwintering trainings, Antarctic medical workshops, and so on. So there are also strengthened efforts for inter-organizational cooperations. So we constantly make reports to the information papers, to the Antarctic Treaty consultative meetings, and also have existing MOUs with IASC and SCAR for a cooperation in polar research. We also had a couple of the opportunities to interact with the EPBs and the US PRBs and so on. So that gives an opportunity for how do we work as in a larger perspectives, because ultimately the polar regions are not more called a regional thing. It's going to be affect the whole globe. So that's something which we should be thinking about working together. And of course, there's also strong interaction with COMNAP and FARO, which is basically the kind of the operational bodies which runs those polar programs. So if you ask the future plans, actually are yesterday we had a kind of a certain discussions on actually how do we build upon the achievements which we made, like information sharing from the schemes and various frameworks for joint works and so on. And how do we strengthen the FOPS? It's already there is good signs of having a permanent secretariat. And we plan to deepen the Asian and international cooperation in polar research through this mechanism. We also hope to create a channel that maximizes the regional contribution to the global community in a much more synergistic way. And ultimately, we want to have a very strong support to the Polar program in the coming decades. And we also want to facilitate more Asian countries. The one way is actually we first call them actually as an observers, and then slowly as they have a program, then ultimately, the different countries start helping them, to create their own programs. So there is also very strong ways to promote the importance of connectivity of polar regions to the global ecosystem, especially to the funding agencies. Ultimately, look at actually how do we why do we are really interested in the polar regions. That makes quite a lot of impact of late because of the changing climate has really made it it's important. So one of the way to how do we contribute to the IPY is one of the discussion which we plan to have actually is a kind of a FOPS kind of a mechanism, or the kind of the cooperations using the various the operational facilities the FOPS countries do have it. And each one probably will have their own program, of course, as like the rest of the world. But we also want to join this different what you call say diamonds, and to make a necklace kind of thing, so which ultimately bring the values to the larger value. And ultimately each can have their own program, but when you connect it, maybe it brings values. Thank you so much. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Thamben. It was great to have that perspective. Thank you. Our last speaker for this set of presentations on national and regional polar organizations and their thoughts towards IPY5 is Martin Jeffries. He is the chair of the U.S. Polar Research Board.
Well, thank you to the previous speakers. That's been very valuable to hear from you and hear about your organizations. And now, what is the Polar Research Board? What do we do, or what can we do? I think it will now that I'm in that view. Yeah. So the Polar Research Board is an advisory board to the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Mathematics in the United States. NASEM, as it sometimes is called. If you want to place that in a broader context, peer organizations would be the Royal Society of Canada or the original Royal Society in the United Kingdom. So the Polar Research Board is an advisory board to the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Mathematics. We are a group of volunteers who advise the National Academies on various topics related to polar research. What are the priorities? What are the new and emerging topics? What are the critical issues facing the United States polar research community? That's many different issues, from research itself, research platforms, logistics, research support, and so on. I would just add that the Polar Research Board, as it now is and is named, is a product of the International Geophysical Year, 1957 and 58. When that IPY, the third IPY, concluded, the United States Organizing Committee for IGY morphed into the Polar Research Board, which has existed under that name ever since. So we're a focal point institution for scientific advice on Arctic and Antarctic issues. That's principally advice to the national academies, but also then more broadly to the United States government and other stakeholders, a very wide range of potential stakeholders. We don't act alone. As a Polar Research Board, there are many, many boards across the entire National Academies organization. And we have a lot in common with many of them, and we do our utmost to work with those boards as well in a kind of convergence fashion, bringing multiple perspectives, experiences, and expertise to address particular issues. And the board itself, because we're a regional board, polar regions, then our membership covers many disciplines. We want to have representation for the Arctic and the Antarctic, and we want to cover as much of the natural sciences and the social sciences and other sciences and topics as we can. We can't cover everything, but as we rotate people in and out, we can enlarge the experience and expertise and impact of the board. The Polar Research Board, the National Academies, support international science coordination by being the authority, if you will, for appointing United States representatives to SCAR and to IASC. And we have Deneb Karentz in the room, for example, is our lead representative to SCAR, and I see Andrei Petrov, who's one of our representatives to IASC. And that's done in consultation with the federal government agencies that do provide support for the work and activities of the Polar Research Board. Currently, that's the National Science Foundation, Office of Polar Programs, and the Cryospheric Sciences Program at NASA. I'm not going to go through all these names and what they do, what their area of expertise is, but we have around 20 members on the board, as I say, covering a wide range of disciplines, a considerable range of experience and expertise here. Also, importantly, and I'm ad-libbing here a bit, it's not just a bunch of old gray people like me. We have experience and expertise from young through older, more experienced. And I think that's very important. And I'm going to bring that topic up again in a moment when I talk about IPY. So the National Academies, the Polar Research Board, or its predecessor, the US Organizing Committee for IGY in 57-58, has played a significant role over the years in planning, preparation, and delivery of international polar years. So if we go back to the most recent one of 2007, 2008, the then Polar Research Board was the US Organizing Committee for IPY4. And in that capacity, was responsible for working with the Academy staff to hold a couple of workshops that started to set or identify priorities, make the case for an international polar year to persuade federal government organizations to get involved as funders, and so on. And I would say that that was really quite successful in as much as there was a lot of new money was appropriated by our Congress for International Polar Year 4. And that was a great benefit, not just for IPY 2007 and 8, but also beyond. There was a knock-on effect for many years, and I think we still feel the benefits of that in our polar programs. And then after IPY 4, there was a study, which is what the Academy does a lot of, studies of issues and so on. But there was basically a post-mortem study of IPY 4 on successes and otherwise. What did we learn from it? What might we improve on for the future, and so on. And this is an important document for us as we look ahead to the next International Polar Year. So rather like Henry described with respect to IASC, the broader international community started thinking about another International Polar Year, IPY 5, back, 4 years ago, 2021. And the Polar Research Board fairly quickly followed, and we started talking about what is the role of the US Polar Research Board and the national academies in International Polar Year 5. We started talking about that in 22, 23 or thereabouts. So we've been having regular discussions about this as a board, and then more broadly with federal agencies and others too. So most recently, almost a year ago now, we had a meeting at the National Academies in Washington, DC, where we had a long and very interesting afternoon with a group of representatives of federal agencies and organizations to basically hear from them what was their current thinking and planning for IPY, but also really to wake them up, if that was necessary, to the fact that planning and preparation for another IPY was underway, and we want you to start thinking about this because you have an important role to play. If you didn't know it before, you ought to leave this meeting today knowing that that is the case. We have a workshop planning committee, has been very busy for 6 months or so. It looks like the first IPY workshop in the United States will be in the 3rd week of May. And this is the first effort to start to discuss primarily what will a United States, or what ought a United States contribution to the next IPY look like? What are the critical issues? What are the big questions? What do we need to focus on? An important aspect of that workshop is, and this was unanimous agreement of the Polar Research Board, that the majority of participants should be early career researchers. They are the future of polar research. They need to have a say in what the next IPY looks like, because some of them are going to be the research leaders in the IPY and beyond the IPY. And we want to give them a voice and having a say in what it will look like. Then at this meeting, I ask 2025, we have this meeting today, and then we have the Polar Research Board meeting today and tomorrow. With a lot of discussion about IPY, obviously. And then we have a session on Thursday afternoon, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., an open session to hear from a panel that the Polar Research Board has assembled to give their individual and institutional views on what the next IPY might look like. And then it's an open forum. We want to hear from the audience. We want their opinions and thoughts and so on. To help the Polar Research Board and the National Academies develop its sort of unified vision for a US and broader contribution to a successful International Polar Year 5. So I've talked already about the workshop. I won't say much more, but you see the list of topics that are up for consideration and discussion in that workshop. And as I'll repeat, it's scheduled for May 20th and the 21st. It will be in Washington, DC for those who can or wish to attend in person, but it will be hybrid and people will be able to participate from a distance using Zoom. Another new and developing activity for the Polar Research Board is Indigenous engagement. You've heard a lot already from the previous speakers about the importance of working as equal partners with the Indigenous peoples of the North. For us, as the Polar Research Board of the United States National Academies, then that's primarily Alaska Natives, the First Nations in Alaska. But they're not the only ones, and we want to work with Arctic indigenous peoples more broadly where it's appropriate and necessary. So as I say, this is an activity just spinning up. It's funded by the national academies themselves. It's internal money. But the purpose is basically to build those bridges that are necessary and build that knowledge and understanding of each other, particularly with a view to how can the Polar Research Board and the national academies work with the indigenous peoples of the North for mutual benefit. This is a population that we haven't had a great deal of contact with, but we recognize that we must in the future, not least for IPY, but also beyond. So it was very interesting to hear from David about how Polar Knowledge Canada has been developing its relationships with the First Nations people of the Canadian Arctic. And I think we will look with interest at that, and perhaps we might have some discussions with David and others in Canada to see what we might be able to copy in the nicest way. That concludes my talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Martin. What we can do now is shift where there can be time for questions specific to any of the speakers about what they presented. And then we can allow the conversation to evolve. We have some prompting questions that we could all consider as well. So does anyone online or in the room have questions? If not, I have one or two. Adelheid, go ahead.
Yeah, Kristen, I'm going to put something in the chat here, and it's, you know, in a lot of the Arctic research reports and the notice of funding opportunities that come out from the Arctic, there's the term well-being of the Arctic residents. And I just wanted to mention that there's been some work done by Rachel Donkersloot on drilling down what that really means. And so it's a really good framework, and I wanted people to know about that. So thank you.
That sounds like maybe something that those resources we should make available to the community, whether people are able to come to a workshop and hear about that or in other ways. So thanks for sharing that. Well, I think that might be Aldehyde. I think so. I think that's her hand. I have one question. I was thinking about something that Maria said in the beginning and then kind of came around to Martin's comments at the end about collaboration, coordination, but then you also included the term communication, which I think is a key connector for all of this. And that made me think of what Martin was describing with, for example, the US workshop. And I'm sure there are workshops, you've all brought this up in other regions. Is there a part of coordinating, collaborating means we need to communicate. For the upcoming workshops, are there possibilities for, I don't know what the right word, maybe delegates from different regions to be able to also attend a workshop for another region? Like in the US workshop coming up, is it possible for people from other regions in the world to join remotely, or same for a program in Europe or Asia or Canada, to try to make sure that we have more opportunities for direct communication across what we're trying to have is a really interconnected global network here in the planning. And I'm not sure if this could go to any one of you to respond, but how can we build those opportunities for maybe delegates to attend?
Could you comment, Casey or April, on the US workshop?
Yeah, so for the workshop that we are hosting, it is intended to be US focused in how we can contribute. However, we invite international participants to join that workshop and participate in the conversations. So we certainly don't want it to be exclusive, and we'll be openly promoting it for anyone to attend.
So a perspective from the European Polar Board. First, for us, it's also important to have the internal communication in place. As I said, we have 31 members from 22 countries. We're likely to have some members here as well in this room. So we want to make sure that, and at the plenary meetings, we meet and discuss, and we're trying to understand what other members are doing and how members can work together in different actions. And of course, we also care how Europe is represented in international discussions. And this is what EPB is trying to do. Can we have a more unified voice, still diverse, because we have a diverse membership reflected in international discussions, and then EPB comes back and report to all the members, because not all members can attend all meetings at the same time. So this is how we work internally and externally. And then we do some actions that they mostly have a regional focus. So all these science policy interfaces we do, mostly coordinating EU-funded projects. They have a regional interest, but those outcomes are open to people. And on May 7, EPB and our colleagues in Sweden, the EPB members, Umeå University, and the Polar Secretariat, were organizing a high-level event on how Europe can have a unified presence at APY in the decade of cryosphere. We know these are two different actions, but as Henry said before, they're running at the same time, and maybe there's some opportunities for some awareness campaigns for IPY or the decade, or for both. This is something we need to discuss. And this event is open. We can share some invitation and more details to people if you want. It's going to be hybrid. And the ambassador of Canada is joining this meeting in person.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I see a couple more hands up. Jenny, I believe your hand was next.
Thanks, and great presentations, and wonderful to hear what everybody's has going on, and fun to think about a next International Polar Year. I can remember very clearly writing 2032 into many of the speeches during the last IPY, so I know when we decided when the next IPY would be. And it's great that you're starting the planning ahead of time, but what I'm missing is the science of why we need it. I mean, we wrote it into, I remember writing it into these statements because it followed the tradition, right, of the second to the third, plus we knew there would be rapid changes. But I don't see the science. And I know we're planning a webinar to lead up to our IPI workshop, which will touch on that. And we've had many of the flyer iterations now that have come around, but I don't see the wonderful Dave Carlson presentation on why we need an IPY. What are the polar regions going to look like in 2032? How is that going to impact the globe? Where is the science? And if IASC and SCAR aren't producing that, who is going to? And I think it's going to be really hard to convince non-science people to get involved with this if we can't tell them why it's important.
Shall I say that? Yeah, thanks, Jenny. It's a point you've made before, and it's appreciated and taken on board. One of the task groups we have is about IPY vision, and so that task group is being led by SCAR. It will have contributions from all the partners, and they will create just the kind of document that you are talking about it's a kind of a motivational, inspirational, why an IPY now, why it matters, what the benefits are, what the outcomes could be, not to list the 25 science priorities that there will be that everyone should fund, but an inspirational kind of vision document. So we are slightly behind with that. I recognize that, and ideally we would have it already, but it's in hand. Good people will be working on it. If other people would like to participate and shoulder some of the burden, they are very welcome to. But we recognize we need this, and the sooner we can have it on that kind of presentation, the better.
I think the timeline, and I think there are many people in the community, many scientists who would like to be involved in that and feel shut out, I guess, from this IPY and don't know how to get involved, that could help move these processes forward. And I know I've said this again, and I sound like a broken record, but I do believe that we really need this and we need it soon. And I don't think it necessarily needs to be one of these visionary, let's try and reword the same themes we had for the past 5 IPYs in the same way. I do think it can be a simple 10-minute video with AI using what the world will look like with the models that we have that can be very dynamic and not necessarily let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and have a party, but be something that will really mean something. And I think the whole community would be willing to do that. So if there's a issue with timelines and things not getting done, maybe you can open it up to more people to get involved. And then maybe that also says that, you know, Girlis is absolutely fantastic. But I do think with everything that's going on, you do need an IPY secretariat or someone more now to help coordinate these things, because it is starting to get a little timely. And the national committees are getting a little on edge on when are they going to get involved. So I know you said you don't think you need a secretariat now, but I think you do. My personal opinion, sorry.
Thanks, Jenny. Well, we do have a secretariat now. It's just not necessarily the permanent one, but we do have people that are working kind of hard on this, and all the task groups are open to anyone. So I don't want anyone to feel excluded. I mean, realistically, we have to manage numbers, but all of those processes are open. If people want to put themselves forward or put colleagues forward, we're welcome to receive that way.
So Mike,
it's not the first time you've heard it from me.
It's always been organizations to join, not individual scientists.
so I think I'm going to step in and say, I think I appreciate all the frank conversation. What we're really trying to do here is to raise some of the issues that matter, and communication there, communication is one. So, here's an action item, but I think efforts are there, but maybe we don't always know of them. So that's something that, it's in the forefront now, which is good. The timeline might be within the next year, perhaps, just to get a sense. Okay, so within the next year, and so and you are open to individuals and organizations adding their contributions to this important effort, and something succinct and high level. Fantastic. Thank you. I know we have some other hands up. Anupma, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just super excited that you all are here. Thank you so much. I was a part of IPY4 when I was a young career researcher at that time. And the impact that IPYs have on a career, it's for a lifetime and it's for generations. So what we're doing here is critically important. We also have been reflecting on things that we learned from the last IPY, because fortunately we are here at this coming IPY and we'll probably see, the impacts of this one. So this, it's great we bring things about communication and about scientific mobility. I think one thing I encourage everyone to think about is how can we lower the barriers for the young career faculty and postdocs and students over there, because in IPY4 also, there was a lot of impact, but you had to individually go and figure out where you can engage, how you can engage. The more we can communicate about it and have maybe a cohorted programs. So every place brings cohorts of young researchers and say, here's how we do. I remember Peter Schweitzer was here. He brought a bus full of about 44 people to my house for a barbecue. And suddenly it was like we were all talking about IPY and the impacts, and those build cohorts. Those are the kind of things just how do we lower the barriers so that they know where to apply, how to do, how to move about. That'll be great.
I think any one of you, if you'd like to speak about how you're envisioning lowering barriers to the individual, to the student, to the early career person, getting involved, like what do you see those steps potentially being? That's great. Or at least it's now on the thought agenda. David, thanks.
Maybe just a quick comment on that, and it's an excellent observation. We held a sort of side meeting at the Arctic Change Conference in December in Ottawa. About 60 people. This was really the first sharing opportunity we had to talk about. There's an upcoming IPY, Canada paying attention to this. about 60 people in the room, and I asked, how many of you were early career researchers in the last IPY? And over half the room put their hand up. And what that says to me is that we just, from a sort of coordination perspective, need to make sure they're involved. And many of them are now senior, leaders in their own fields, in their own institutions. We make sure they're involved. And because of their experience from last time, this is part of the legacy, I think that will help to lower the bar just from the very beginning. We won't be creating an Apex. We'll be using an Apex philosophy and an Apex organization and all of the people that grew up through since the last IPY and had that experience. So I'm quite optimistic. I don't have a mechanistic sort of answer, but I think it'll be easier this time than last time.
A quick follow-up. I'm wondering, are there in any of your organizations, are there early career researchers involved in the planning, at the level that is working right now? We know we want to bring them in, but are there early career researchers already part of the process? Go ahead, Henry.
Thanks. Yeah, and absolutely right from the very start. So Apex have been involved right from 2021 in thinking about this. Apex are represented within the planning group and also represented within the task groups on education and outreach. So yeah, and in fact, they're leading that task group. So yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for bringing it back to the idea that there are the planning groups and the task groups. So I think that's a good reminder for some of the points that are coming up. Go ahead, Maria.
Yeah, so from EPB, we have a small secretariat. And as I mentioned, we're a members organization, and the EPB members will decide how they will contribute to IPY and who is going to be involved. This is something of their decision. But as I mentioned, we have a memorandum of understanding with Apex, and also the European Polar Coordination Office will work with a lot of early careers who are engaged at the EU funded projects. And the European Polar Coordination Office will coordinate all these projects. And as I said before, we don't, maybe as David said, we don't have a clear answer yet because the members need to decide how they're going to be involved. But thinking about previous experiences, we know how to engage with early careers and engage early careers in our actions. For the May 7 event, we're going to have early careers from Apex being at our sessions and our panels. And I'm confident that there will be opportunities of actions that we might do to actively engage them and hear their perspectives.
That's great. It sounds like a very common theme that this will happen. Martin, I see that your hand is up. I wasn't sure if that was on this point or if you were shifting the conversation, but you're next.
Not exactly a shift. No, I'd like to go back to what Jenny said and follow up. 13 years ago, ASSW was in Montreal, Canada. Some of you were there. But the title of it was also the final act of the last IPY. It was a sort of summation of what did we do. And the title of that conference was Knowledge to Action. And it's always struck me as being a bit odd that you would finish an IPY looking at how are we going to translate our curiosity-driven research into some higher value products, services, solutions, and so on. We need to be thinking about that now or even earlier than now with respect to the upcoming IPY, because I think the outcome and the measures of success of the next IPY can't just be peer-reviewed papers in leading journals, which tend to gather dust, largely unread. We have to be thinking about action-oriented research, use-inspired research. What are we going to turn this research into that's useful to society or to people, communities, and society? Because that's the world we live in, I think, where we can no longer afford to be just focusing on peer-reviewed papers and moving on to the next proposal and a little bit of incremental research. We need to think big, and we need to do it now. Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Quickly, thank you for that setup, Martin, because I think that's the most important point that we can act on now. I brought a door prize.
Oh, no. Oh, no, I know what it is.
Okay,
He's opening a very thick box.
Yes.
okay. This is my last sort of extra copy that I have, but I think it's always available online. There's a whole chapter in the report. The Joint Committee wrote a report, 700 pages after the last IPY, and there's a whole section in here on the legacy and looking at legacies and what had been implemented by the time we hit 2011 when this was published and what there was still to do. And I just want to recommend that we don't need to start at the beginning to think about that. We can go back to the thinking that went in from, starting about 2005, 2006 in the last planning process, thinking about what those outcomes would be. I think it's a really important part of the process. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I really don't want to carry it back home, but you can talk to me later.
Oh, goodness. I think we have some dense required reading on our plate right now. but that's a great point. Thinking about the lessons learned and maybe trying to prioritize, identify what the top maybe 5 lessons learned are from the previous IPY would be a valuable next step for every organization and every group that was part of it. I'd like to make sure we get to all the questions that we can. I see Lynn has her hand up.
Hi, is that on? Yeah, it was just a follow up on these various things. I wanted to understand, I totally agree with Jenny on the making sure there's a science focus pretty soon. And that's not just the overarching, what are the huge problems, but by getting that into a little bit more granularity so people know where to slot in, if they're working on sea ice or they're working on thwaites or they're working on whatever. Or ecosystems off the Antarctic Peninsula and the Ross Marine Protected Area. My question is, how does the IPY5 workshop that the Polar Board is going to be running in May slot into the international? I kind of, you probably all covered that already, but I don't quite get the picture yet. It will come out of this workshop in May with results and ideas and a lot of excitement. How does that get back to the international
I'm not
groups?
sure if Martin or do any of you want to take that on? How the workshop from the Polar Research Board that'll be coming in later this year, how do we take what comes out of that and ensure that it's communicated and shared with the international bodies that are the big umbrella for organizing?
I'll begin an answer and then hand over to April and Casey, because they'll probably want to correct me. I don't know how long it will take for the workshop report to be written, but let's say it's done by the end of this calendar year. Seems reasonable for a workshop in May. April's smiling. And it will be a widely circulated workshop report. It won't be confidential, classified in any way. So anyone will be able to get their hands on it via the National Academy's website, but we will make sure that it is circulated to everyone that we feel needs to see it, so that they get a sense of what the thinking is in the United States. And it's all part of the communication effort and so on.
Thanks, Martin. Just to build on this, I think like we've been hearing from everyone is relatively early on in planning and things are evolving. And this workshop is not setting any formalized priorities. It's intended to provide a forum for the research community to bring up issues that they view as being potential priority areas for the United States to engage, and thinking about how we would do that in a meaningful way in the international context and collaborate and coordinate. So I think this is meant to be kind of a stage setting forum for the research community to come together. So it will be continuing to evolve, I think, as all of your work evolves as well, and is not intended at all to be in isolation from those discussions.
Henry, I have a question, and then I'd like to go to Deneb next. kind of thinking about the science and what that high level science focus might be, you had shared a number of in your flow chart that had all of these other studies, various UN studies. Are threads being taken from each of those of what those priorities are, and then trying to integrate and then tie that to what the IPY5 priorities may be? Pass a microphone down.
Yes. It's a complicated old picture. And every 5 minutes, there seems to be a new UN decade or another initiative. We're not trying to set IPY up above the other things, nor are we looking for IPY to be within kind of those, but where there are synergies and connections, we'll look out for them. And lots of the people that are involved in IPY planning, if you look on those organizations in the planning group, lots of those also have roles within the UN kind of decades and elsewhere, particularly the WMO and UNESCO. So we'll look to find the connections where we can, but it's fair to say that it's not sorted out yet.
Okay. But it's one. It sounds like it's one source of information. There are a lot of different sources of information, such as these workshops that are happening, existing reports, and then it turns into a really complex, multidimensional Venn diagram and trying to find where that nexus is that can help move the science forward and in support of polar research.
Yes, and it's for the community as a whole to decide, what you want IPY to be. It's not going to be one bucket of money that everyone tips money into, and then we identify 5 brilliant things to do, we fund it, and that's it. It will be much more, I think, an umbrella, kind of an endorsement process, but it's all up for grabs. That's why we started it early, to make sure there was enough chance to make it what was most useful. I absolutely take on board the point about the vision. When it comes to the science priorities, for the Arctic side, that's where ICARP comes in. So it won't be the be all and end all, but ICARP will provide some of those science priorities for the Arctic. And then we'll look to the Antarctic community to do something similar or whatever works for them. And then together we'll look for what the connections and the teleconnections are between the two.
That's great. Okay, thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left before we break for lunch. And I know Deneb, has been waiting. If you'd like to go next.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the issue of how the information from the PRB workshop will get back to the IPY. And I think something that's sort of gets lost a lot of times. So the PRB is the National Committee for IASC and for SCAR. And between Matt and Andre and myself and Al, we're very well connected. We are very active in those organizations, and it would be very easy for information from the PRB to get relayed back to the international level of SCAR and IASC. And that would also be a way if individuals have things that they want to contribute and they feel like they don't have a route to do that, get in touch with any of the four of us and we can make that happen. So I think it's actually easier than what people are envisioning.
That's great. It's great to hear the practical steps. Thanks so much. And in addition to the theoretical concepts that we're moving towards, we have very little time left, but I'd like to make sure Chris has her opportunity to raise her comments or question. And the microphone is coming your way.
This is just a simple question. I was just curious if AFOPS has any ongoing discussions about IPY and what you envision what the forum will be doing, because it wasn't specifically touched on in your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I think I've been not been clarified that basically the idea is there was a meeting yesterday, and then we had decided that we will have create a half day complete brainstorming session for IPY. How do we plan for IPY, and how do we come with these regional collaborations, as well as how do we utilize the existing assets in polar regions to connect the research. So that would be in September in Goa. There's an annual general meeting is going to happen, and immediately after that we are having a 1 day, of which half day will be on this brainstorming. So we do not know at this stage So for me, it's too early to say that whether we will have something in FOPS, actual as a regional contribution. Of course, each nations are coming up with their own. In fact, China has come with their own plans and so on. So, but as a community, how do we want to address it? And how do we want to connect the individual efforts? That's what we'll be discussing. Thank you.
Thank you all. And with that, I want to thank all of our speakers today, taking the time to share where the planning is at, and we see many opportunities to move forward. The conversation for those in person here can continue during the networking lunch break. And then at 1:30, we have an open session again, and then we'll continue thinking about coordination and collaboration and communication. Thanks everyone very much.
Maybe a continuation with change.
You get a chance to answer questions.
Should I call this to order? All right, everybody, it's 1:30 or 1:31. Shall we get started? Pick up where we left off, basically this morning or before lunch, when I think we had a very useful session in which the organizations represented learned quite a bit about each other, and more particularly about where things stand with regard to planning and preparations for the next IPY. And I think there was some, in amongst all that information, there was the beginnings of some thoughts about where we might collaborate, on what topics, how we might collaborate, and so on. Rather than me try to summarize any further, I'd like to open the discussion to the floor. And if anyone has further thoughts on what they heard this morning that they didn't get a chance to say before lunch, and particularly our guests at the back of the room there, or those who are joining us by Zoom, we would love to hear you, hear what you have to say, your ideas, etc. But ultimately, I would hope that we would conclude the session not necessarily with a formal statement of agreement on action items and a path forward, but we can have advanced the conversation a bit further so that after the meeting, we can lay out a summary of the discussions that identifies some of the things we might do further to advance IPY. I see a hand up at the back. If you could go ahead, please.
Should I have a microphone first, or I can?
Yeah.
I think this is, of course, a thing that all of us are aware of us. But for this week here, we missed one of the very big players in the Arctic. How to deal with that? I've been part of an article that it was published last year in Nature, Climate Change, where it was showing that if we need to describe the viability in the Arctic, then we need to have the Russian station with us. So what have you thought about how to include what we should, if we don't kind of have Russia in, how can we then having a really preparation towards an IPY with a good progress and so on? So that is, of course, one question. And then from my background myself, I'm Danish, and I don't see any Danish in the board, and neither from Greenland, and maybe, well, I'll go definitely home and say that that will be very important to have into the board. So,
thank you. We have to start somewhere. That's not to say that any nation or any group is excluded, but we can't include everybody all at once in meetings of the Polar Research Board, for example. On the elephant in the room, the Russian question, it's something we as a Polar Research Board of the United States have had our own discussions about. Of course, it's a very difficult issue. I understand you bringing it up, but and this is Martin Jeffries, private citizen speaking now. You should speak to the Russians. They invaded Ukraine. They're the aggressors, let's face it.
but maybe the question is that more important than the climate change? And I think it's difficult.
I just want to say that EPB has a member from Denmark, and this is the Danish Institute. So, of course, EPB, we cannot speak on behalf of the members per se, but Denmark is included in the EPB discussions, and what we share reflects this collaborative discussions we have.
Michael, you had a point you wanted to make?
Yeah, on a completely different note.
Can I say something on this topic?
Oh, absolutely.
Could I make a comment on the current topic first? So I just like to say that Russia is a member of good standing in SCAR. And so they will have input into any of the IPY discussions that, and I'm assuming they're a member of IASC. So they have the opportunity to contribute. So don't take this meeting as being the only group that's involved.
So I'm Michael Tjärnström, Stockholm University and the Swedish Polar Research Secretariat. On a completely different note, I'm wondering in this grand scheme of IPY planning, where are the national weather services? We often talk about WMO, but it's very often in a WCRP context. But the weather services provide very important and useful information, but they also provide a lot of climate. Many of the reanalysis that we are using for monitoring climate are actually provided for by national weather services. So there is another program besides WCRP, namely the WWRP, and they are having a polar-oriented program right now called PCAPS, which is a follow-up on the Polar Prediction Project that ran the year of polar prediction, if you remember. So I'm wondering how, maybe not for this national board, but in the bigger context with IPY planning, are you talking to the National Weather Services? I know Met Norway and Environment Canada are very involved.
Thank you, Michael. Certainly within the United States, we as the Polar Research Board, we are talking to NOAA and the National Weather Service. We would hope that they will be as engaged as they can be in a US contribution to IPY in due course. WCRP, we have CLIC coming as guests tomorrow to tell us what they're up to. One might have hoped reasonably that WMO would itself have put forward WWRP and WCRP folks to get involved in the international planning group. I think I'll leave it at that. So Henry Burgess, please go.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, within the IPY planning group, we've got WWRP, WMO, WCRP, CLIC, and others as well. So they are involved at that level. But it's early stages, but I take the point completely about National Weather Services. But through those routes, hopefully we will reach out to those services.
It's an underutilized source. They have research resources that they can bring to bear like that if they want.
Well, we can stir them up at the planning group level, but if you can stir them up from your contacts as well, then that's a good way of doing it. And just to reinforce the point that Deneb mentioned about Russia within IASC and SCAR, within the IPY Executive Committee, we have the International Science Council, where Russia is a full member, and we have WMO, where they participate as well. So at that level, they are engaged. But we need to hear from them if they want to be engaged and how they want to be engaged.
Any other comments, suggestions, ideas? Maybe I could ask, I can't remember now if it was David or Henry I was going to ask the question, but we ran out of time. Jenny Baseman brought up this morning I think it's a fact that there are members of the polar research community who are getting a little anxious about how they engage in this planning and preparation process. How do they get their thoughts into the mix? It reminded me, somebody mentioned the previous IPY, and it made me think of the hexagons, the much sought after hexagons that people, when they submitted their little proposals or something to the international office, and some holy polar water was sprinkled on them, and they were awarded a hexagon with their brief project title in, and then the map of hexagons grew. There was some effort to line hexagons up with hexagons that were related to each other. And this was intended to not only get the ideas out there from the individual researchers and groups, but also to use it as a means to encourage collaboration internationally. I'm sure there's a chapter in the doorstop that David brought with him about how well that worked or not. There we go. But have you had discussions about when and how you will open up the effort to broader consultation and contributions of ideas and so on?
Yes, we have a meeting of the planning group. This group that's on the front of the concept note here, they will be meeting on the 10th of April. We'll have two separate meetings, one first thing in the morning, one last thing at night, to account for the time zones of everyone involved. And they will begin the discussion about the endorsement process. And I think that's connected to what you were saying. From an Arctic perspective within IPY, again, we have the ICARP process. So the ICARP process, if it works well, which it will produce good descriptions of what the community thinks are the science priorities. And I hope we will be able to use those as an example of things that we can collaborate on. And we want those priorities to be as practical and as clear as possible, so people can identify them, they can work with the national and international funders and really get something to work. So no one's ruled out doing the hexagons again, but we just haven't got to that discussion at a planning group stage.
David, did you want to add something at all?
I'm thinking if there's anything else to add at this stage. The honeycomb diagram turned out to be extremely useful, but to extend the analogy a little bit, it was a beehive, right? Where you get the honeycomb, and we're at that stage right now where, we have a bunch of different hives that they're sort of percolating ideas. And as I said earlier, I think we can only run as fast as we have to let others catch up. And that's true not just internationally, but that's true domestically, at least for Canada as well, to ensure that we're creating an opportunity from the earliest stages for all of the voices that need to participate, that we would want to have participating in IPY to have that opportunity. So I think as much as we know there's an urgency for, in some areas, you know, from some groups to advance things, I think we also have to not get so far ahead that there isn't room for others to participate as well. So I think Henry's right. We're at a point right now where we're opening up the dialogue, but how we coalesce all of that into some more coherent description of what IPY is, I think a vision document will help, and that's going to be fast-tracked. We need to, you know, and with a secretariat that's really just an initiating secretariat, we need to look at how we make sure we have resources to compile and share all of these ideas as well. So maybe we're just a few months ahead of ourselves in terms of getting too worried about that. But I mean, those of us that have been involved in conversations over the last few years to get to this stage are well aware that there's a need for better articulating how everyone can get involved and contribute to the planning of IPY.
Without flogging a dead horse, but I like your description of the beehive, where it's the workers who do the real work and that make a beehive a success. And it's, to translate that to polar research, it's the researchers and their grad students, they're even undergraduates, their postgrads, with the financial support of their governments, their funding agencies, that we won't have a successful IPY without the work of these. So Adelheid has her hand up, then Jenny and Kristen.
Yeah.
Adelheid, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been involved in the ICARP 4 planning, not necessarily with the Indigenous people, but just kind of on the surface of knowing what they're doing, you know, and so that process, I think, is a one to look at for a model that, you know, they brought Indigenous people into the conversation and elevated their voices, I'm hoping. So anyway, I think that would be a good model to look at. And also, I had a side conversation with Mr. David Hicks and talking about collaboration, you know, between Canada and the United States, or actually any pan-Arctic nation, that there's a lot to learn from each other. I think Canada's kind of ahead of us anyway with the Indigenous engagement and, you know, putting Indigenous rights into their constitution and things like that. So anyway, that's my comment.
Thank you, Adelheid. I went to graduate school in Canada long ago, and I've always thought that the US and Canada, at the very least, should be doing a lot more together in the Arctic. That's not to exclude other countries, but two neighbors, reasonably friendly until whenever, should be working together more. So Jenny and then Kristen.
I'm sorry, there we go.
Sorry, thanks. I think what you guys just said was extremely helpful, and that a lot of us maybe who were involved in the last one are expecting things to move a little faster or wanting to see where things will go. I know you have a secretariat, but that secretariat is people who already have a full-time job and are already overworked. And if your meeting is on April 10th, I'm just wondering, I mean, when are these people going to have time to write up these reports and all these things? Like, I know you need you say you have a secretariat, but I just don't think there's enough capacity to move these things forward. And I think if you had just a little more capacity, you could, but I'll stop beating that dead horse. Because I think those two people are amazing, but I just don't think there's enough capacity to help move these things forward. So maybe a better approach would be a simple statement from SCAR and IASC saying, we understand the community is anxious to get involved. Here are the things that are happening. A simple, direct, not a big flyer statement, but just saying, these are the things that are happening. This is the timeline we're hoping to work on, so that people know at least, okay, national committees we're hoping will be formed by And the dates, having the little tittle. But just so people have an idea of when they can expect to get involved, I think that might be really helpful. Because right now, everybody's kind of sitting here like it's being planned behind closed doors. And anyone who was involved in the last one knows it's the exact opposite. And I just want to avoid that. So maybe a simple statement, just saying this is kind of the plan. And you might think you already have that, but the community is telling you it's not hearing that. Henry's hating me, I know.
No, not at all. No. It's an open conversation, and it's the whole point of these conversations is to hear from people who have experience of IPY, who have helped run them in the past, and also those who will help run them in the future. We have been, I hope, kind of self-consciously keen to be as open about IPY as we could all the way through. That's why we've had a number of versions of this. So the timeline, how to get involved, the website, all of that is in here, but we can't, as a small group of people, decide everything about IPY immediately, because then in settings like this, you would say it's all agreed. And it's not all agreed, because we have a process to go through and we have people to engage and consult. And so we're trying to do that thing which we all do in our organizations, which is to provide leadership, but also provide space for the community to inform what happens. And if we've got it wrong in some cases, then we'll try and get it better in the future. But the truth is we don't know exactly yet how it's going to work. So we can't tell everyone how it's going to work. And if we were telling you completely how it's going to work, I think you'd be sat around here saying you haven't given us a chance to help with that. So this meeting or this opportunity and our planning group and all the other things which are open to everyone to engage in, we'll do that. I take the point completely about national kind of organizations, and we will, I hope, quite soon be able to tell people something about those national points of contact. But you are here in the US much more advanced in your thinking about IPY than lots of other countries are. And I completely take David's point. And I think it's right that we need to give people space to catch up with this and not be expecting every country to have an immediate national point of contact or an immediate national committee, because we're not there. And if we say that immediately, then there are lots of countries who we will want to engage in IPY who are just saying, oh, it's the usual suspects, you've got your national committees, you're doing it all. And I don't want to do that. But this is an art, not a science. In terms of the Secretariat, we have said publicly, it says in the document, it says on the website that we will have a secretariat, we will have a dedicated secretariat. But whether that's in one country or whether that's a dispersed secretariat, then we have to see. I mean, if one useful thing that people could be doing is if you think you have capacity to contribute towards a secretariat, then develop those ideas, keep that powder dry. So when it comes to the point where we say, probably relatively quite soon, here's an opportunity to contribute to a secretariat, you're ready to go. That's what I would say. Thanks.
Thanks, Henry. Kristen, you had something, and then Danae.
Thank you. I think it's along the same lines, thinking about communication and ways people could get involved. I'm thinking of it from the perspective of if someone is an individual researcher like myself, an individual researcher, not part of well, I guess I am part of a board, pretend I'm not for a moment. And I hear about IPY5 and I want to figure out how I could share a thought or get involved. What would be that mechanism at this point? Is there, when we go to the website, is there a place where you could then say, okay, I'm in the US or I'm in a country in Europe. So then, you can kind of pick and say, okay, the next, I have a place where I could submit an idea. Like, is there a virtual town hall, for example, where people could submit ideas? Okay, that would be a virtual town hall type information gathering that could maybe be then directed to the different geographic regions. That could be, it gives, people need to know they have a voice and that there's a way to hear it. Yes. So, but I know we're a little ahead of, I guess we're trying to inform the planning. So this is great. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to address the issue about the secretariats, the current IASC and SCAR secretariats being able to handle this. I don't know what the situation is with IASC, but there are 6 people working in the secretariat for SCAR, and it's not just Chandrika by herself. So a lot of times the work that is required for the secretariat gets distributed across the various people. SCAR is responsible for the Southern Ocean UN Ocean Decade, and they have actually hired a part-time graduate student to help with that. So I don't think that right now we need to be concerned about the secretariats not being able to handle the work that's being undertaken at this point. Certainly there will need to be an IPY secretariat later on when the workload gets to be much greater. But I don't think it's something that we should be harping on.
Isn't the science plan in SCAR's hands right now, and that's why there's delay? The science justification.
We've got a series of task groups, as I was talking about. So we have the IPY executive committee, we have the planning group, and then we have a series of the task groups. And one of those task groups is on kind of vision and kind of not leadership, but yeah, vision of the IPY, addressing just the point that you and others have talked about that kind of what's that energizing, inspirational purpose to the IPY. And so that group is still forming up, and that group will be the one that takes responsibility for producing that statement, basically. Some of those task groups are being supported by IASC, some of them are being supported by SCAR. That vision group is being supported by SCAR, but we will, this is a joint effort, and we will pull together and we will make sure that vision work in that task group happens as quickly as it can.
Thank you, Henry. Deneb. Other comments, questions, advice? This is a good opportunity to get your ideas, recommendations out there. Everything is on the table at the moment for consideration, and hopefully the best ideas will win out to give us a successful IPY. Very quiet. Must have been a good lunch. Well, I think it, okay. So Jenny, go ahead, and then David.
On a completely different note, I saw on the agenda for the Arctic Frontiers Conference that a number of the national research facilities, NPI, and a few other ones meet periodically. I don't think there's any group or institute from the US that meets with that group. I'm wondering if anybody else in this audience back here is involved in those meetings and what you're talking about, because it'd be great to know what that organization or that group of people are talking about and how the US might be able to engage with your planning.
Yeah, Arctic Frontiers.
Yeah, for those who don't know me, I'm Nicole, and I'm from the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven, the former EU PolarNet coordinator. I attended a meeting and Henry was there as well. We had a meeting at the Arctic Frontiers, but it was a bit similar like this. You know, it was the first introductory and brainstorming meeting with the participants of the conference. In fact, the discussion were a little bit the same as we had here. What turned out that at least in Europe, we are on a very different level of engagement. So for example, Norway has already set up a national committee. Germany has not even started to discuss that an IP will come up, you know, and that's why it's good that we start so early now, because countries also need different time periods to sort themselves. But there was nothing spectacular new. So that was the first beginning. And of course, we also more or less indicated our interest to contribute and so on, but nothing further than here. But since I have the microphone, I would like to give another comment. For my country, so for Germany, the last IPY, we did not get a single cent of funding. This may be our own fault, but that's, for us, it's very good that we start so early now in preparing the IPY, because to perform additional science, which is in our case, partially additional science, we need also additional funding. And Jenny mentioned nicely this science plan, which we need, or what we also need, and we discussed this yesterday, is something which we can hand out to funding agencies. So, and this cannot be on a scientific level, that has to be a bit lower level, you know, so that they understand why IPY is important and why we are doing it and how they can contribute. This only, I think that is not needed tomorrow, but it is, we have a funding group, a planning group, and we will work on such a document also, that we have something fancy in our hand to convince our national and, in our case, especially European funding agencies to get support. But you missed nothing in Norway.
David, you had something to say.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And you know, I think we're all in agreement. We're at a critical phase of moving planning forward, but the lead time that we've given ourselves is going to be to our advantage. So we'll get there. There's a couple of things that I just was thinking about as I looked around the room, and that is, you know, from the very beginning, one of the instigators in the early planning of this IPY was the University of the Arctic. And that is another mechanism, Kristen, to your point, of how individuals can get engaged through their UArctic membership, thematic networks and things like that. And I think, you know, we're still dealing with ICARP 4, but as an outcome of that will be an opportunity. And I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but it's, again, that I think will emerge on the horizon. And the other group that is already thinking about this, and I just saw you there, Egil, is the Arctic Science Funders Forum. We met on earlier this week. And that's another mechanism where we're looking at trying to find out as early as possible what funders, national funders, science funders, whether it's European Commission, Belmont, if you want to think of, you know, other potential funding mechanisms, looking at what's on their horizon and allowing them to look at opportunities for coordination. So that's all sort of happening in the background right now. And I think once there's a little bit clear line of sight on that, it can feed into the coordination process and will give researchers, research groups, national programs, perhaps a clear line of sight on how they can participate. So these are all good questions from my perspective, and having seen it last time, you know, the advantage of giving ourselves more lead time should be obvious, but it also leads to the situation of, as Jenny says, you know, trying to have a clear roadmap so people don't feel anxious that they've been left out.
Thanks, David. I'd just like to pick up on something Nicole said. I kind of smiled when you said we need a lower level document to make the rationale because it needs funding. And while we all have a pretty low opinion of most politicians, I think we shouldn't talk about it as a lower level document like Polar Science 101 or Polar Science for Idiots. But a policy document is very important. And it's as important almost as the scientific rationale and the priorities and so on. And that's not we have to persuade the funders, but you also have to persuade the policymakers because they hold the purse strings. They appropriate the funds for the funders. And so that policy document is very important, and we need scientists don't typically write very good policy documents. Let's be honest with ourselves. So we need help to craft these policy level documents. There's going to be science and research language in there. There has to be, but you have to make a case, an economic case or whatever it is, national interest case as well. So you have to talk to the policymakers in policy language. Same with the funders and so on.
That's what I mean. So low level is, I'm not a native speaker. Jeffrey, I don't mean low level because they are stupid. I mean that it should not be too scientific because exactly what you said. So.
Anything else before I kind of swivel us back to?
Yeah, yeah, just quickly, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm just going to tell you like a personal observation. You know, I started working at University of Alaska Fairbanks for ACAP in 2019, and part of my work is looking at like University of the Arctic, and it's like it's this nebulous thing. You know, it's there, but you know, how can someone get involved in it, or how can students be involved in it? So I think what would be really good is if we had University of Arctic representatives like University of Alaska Anchorage and University of Alaska Fairbanks come and talk to us about you know, what's going on with their university. I'm even on like a thematic network thing that but that's all I know about it. Anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Adelheid. I see a hand up at the back. Please go ahead, grab a mic and.
Thank you so much for opening this up to questions and comments. In line with yours, Adelheid, I wonder if there's any scope for not just academic groups and consortiums to have a voice at this early point, but operational providers and possibly groups like working groups of the Arctic Council, groups that might not have an academic, a scientific main purpose, but who would be heavily involved. Thank you.
Thanks. One could relate this to a comment I made earlier that perhaps a strong focus of the next IPY is use-inspired research or action-oriented research. And that's when you need to be engaging with many other third parties, because what do they need has to guide the research. And so I think you raise a very important point. And specifically talking about the Arctic Council, it so happens that the United States chairmanship of the Arctic Council coincides pretty much one-to-one with the next International Polar Year. And we have already had some conversations with the US Department of State about that and how it represents an opportunity for the State Department to get more involved in an international effort like IPY and so on. It's a long way out, different administrations and so on, but we're trying to sow seeds with these other entities and organizations to encourage them to get involved and remain involved. Henry, please go ahead.
Sorry, you're hearing a lot from me, sorry. But just on the Arctic Council point, AMAP, the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, they are within our planning group, the IPY planning group. SEON, which is a joint IASC Arctic Council group, is a member of the planning group. And so they're there as well. And in terms of operational engagement, Forum of Arctic Research Operators, they are on our group, and I hope that COMNAP, which is the Antarctic version, will join in due course as well. So, yeah.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I'd like to bring us back, if you will, to the original purpose, ultimate purpose of meeting today with our colleagues from other countries and organizations, and that was identifying some potential action items that we could work on together over a range of terms. Could be short, it could be much longer. But I wondered for David, Maria, and Henry, if there's anything during the last few hours, during the discussions and so on, any thoughts you've had about things we might do collectively to move the ball forward? You're the quarterback. No, you're not a quarterback. You're a linebacker. I don't know what that means. I still follow. I still follow English Premier League soccer.
Yes, first, as I mentioned before, at EPP, we discussed this topic, yet the members, and I'm sure that IPY will be a topic of discussion for our next plenary meetings, and action is being developed. The EPP members will also discuss and come to consensus on collaborative efforts. As I mentioned, all our members they will have their own agenda and their own ways to contribute individually. We will try to bring these efforts together and identify these collaborative efforts. So that said, we're not in a position to say, except the main actions we probably can collaborate at the moment, but be something that we can agree is to have a dialogue open and share updates. As I said before, EPB, we're doing a lot of actions that they might have a regional focus, and that is Europe, but also have actions that we want to see how Europe is being presented and communicated in international discussions, and we want to understand what are the topics of discussions and how international partners see them, and then discuss this as well. So having this communication bridge, having a dialogue and share updates, invite each other to events we're doing that might be of interest. I think this is something that it's safe to say it's one way forward at this stage. And also we have some EPP members here. I think if they want to say something, at the moment we're only sharing ideas. So I will invite them for any comments.
I think I'm just very happy to have been here today because it's already opened up some lines of communication. In the next weeks, I'll invite Al and Deneb to join our next meeting of the Canadian Committee on Antarctic Research, and I think we'll see some synergies emerge from that. Certainly, I think there are opportunities to help support tribal and First Nation Indigenous organizations in Alaska and Canada to conversation themselves about their vision for International Polar Year as it emerges. Last June, Polar Knowledge Canada, we hosted the U.S. Arctic Research Commission with our board of directors in Cambridge Bay. I think, there's going to be opportunities we should look at for continuing to meet with the PRB and others to work on collaborative opportunities leading towards IPY. But we have a lot of time between now and 2032, so we don't need to be looking that far down the track. There's things we can probably do in the coming months and years as well. And yeah, just welcome this, and we should look for for ongoing opportunities to continue to meet.
I have a question for Henry. You mentioned the action groups that the international group has. One of them's the action groups. I think you said there are 3, and one is to develop a vision document, for example. Now, if I understand it correctly, these action groups, they're made up of people drawn from the broader international group in the individual organization. is there a space there? Is there an opportunity there to draw on people from beyond the current international group, to draw on experience and expertise that is undoubtedly out there, who have a particular experience or expertise that could really help one of these action groups and bring in some outside thought to it?
Yeah, definitely those task groups, they're open to anyone to be part of. You don't have to be one of the existing organizations within the planning group. They're open to kind of everyone. We need to keep them sort of practical and functional, so they're not going to be hundreds of people. But yes, if you think you have something to contribute to those, and and the list of them is all on the website, please consider putting yourself forward. That would be good. But they are working groups or task groups. So if you join, then you'll be working. The other thing I think it would be useful to do is if the routes that you have to spread the message about IPY, I recognize we're not completely there yet, but the website, the concept note through your organizations, if you can spread that message, that would be a very helpful thing to do. And in due course, there will be an opportunity for each country that would like to have one to have a national point of contact, to have a national committee. So I invite PRB to think about that. It doesn't need to be straight away, but at some point, it would be good to know from each country that would like to get involved in IPY, whether you will have a national point of contact and the structure below. But that's at some point in the future, not now.
Thank you, Henry. Other comments, other points anyone would like to make? Jenny and then Anupma. Thank you.
Want me to go first? Martin says you go first.
I think you all know I care very deeply about the IPY, but there's a lot of time between now and then, and I think there's a lot of things we can do together before then. I'm going to bring up something that I haven't heard many people talk about today, but I'm a little worried about our US scientists. And I'm wondering if there's opportunities from your various different organizations and entities, and I know some of them were presented today that the US scientists could take advantage of, and if we could somehow maybe put together a little document or something on ways, how this is how a US researcher could come to Cambridge Bay and do some work here or something along those lines. If there's I remember putting something like this together for the Arctic Science Ministerials on opportunities for Indigenous people to get involved or people from other different organizations. And I'm just thinking about our fellow US scientists who are in need of some ideas that we probably haven't thought of before. And if there's some way we could work together to put together particularly something for young researchers as they're losing their funding now.
Well, the doors are always open, and there's, at least at CHARS, all of our support for international researchers is provided in kind. You get yourself there, we'll look after the accommodations, lab space, lab equipment, access to the field, technical support. So that's open to anyone in the world, really. And as long as possible, we'll continue to provide that as in kind. There's other opportunities, I think, through other research networks and collaborations. But I think we have to be honest that the current situation also means that science funding in Canada is going to disappear as well.
So from Europe, all the APP members, they have their own national fundings and they have their own rules and who is applicable to what. So people can check this. And then on the EU level, also EU has opportunities for early careers like Marie Curie, ERC projects. Again, there's some conditions who can join or not. Those are strongly related to mobility. So there's some opportunities there. So I know in the past, a lot of US citizens, they took a Marie Curie fellowship and they had to do 2 years in Europe and 1 year somewhere in their own country in the US. So there's this opportunity. But I would like, I don't know if Nicole is still here. I would like to, because Nicole is a coordinator of another amazing EU project that calls Polarin, that is all about access to research infrastructures. And there are some calls. I don't know exactly the details, but if you would like to comment on that. And they have a lot of emphasis on training and early careers, but also training polar scientists.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, Polarin, we just is offering access to infrastructures in both poles. Yeah, and it is open to applications from all over the world. So also from people from the US, and I think we also had a couple of applications from, not so little applications from the US in the first call. The problem is a little bit, the US is not a developing country. That means EU funding for US is very restricted. Yeah, so you cannot participate in the research and innovation projects without your own funding. Marie Curie and ESC is something totally different, but that means you have to come to Europe. And when it comes to Polarin, we are open up to a level of 20%. That's what we are allowed to provide to non-European scientists. But I would like to add something. I'm coming from a Helmholtz Institute in Germany, and Polarstern is always open, and also all our infrastructure is open for international participants, and it is in a Helmholtz strategy that it is fully free. You know, the only thing your young researchers need to do is aligning with AVI scientists or German scientists, and then you can access Polarstern, Neumeier station, our station in the Arctic without any problem. That's a mandate of the Helmholtz Association in Germany. So I think there is a lot of potential to cooperation, and especially also to support younger researchers. And finally, I again would like to stress what Maria said. These Marie Curie grants, even if they bring you to a European country, usually push the career of a early career a lot. And if you are a bit further advanced, you can also apply without any problem for an ESC. Maria mentioned that. Of course, you have to come to Europe with this, always, because that's the idea behind. Let's say clearly they want to get the good brains from all over the world to Europe. Clear, otherwise they would not fund. But there are a lot of opportunities. And I think I do not make a mistake. I'm not the boss of AVI, but I think AVI would be happy to host US scientists, also especially when it comes to Antarctica InSync, which is this large-scale initiative which will develop into the IPY. And this can also be an example on how to set up a large-scale international initiative. So there are a lot of opportunities, and you have to get in contact with us simply. And I'm happy to be an entrance point to the AVI. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Could you hand the, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. My name is Antonio Quesada. I am the Executive Director of the Spanish Polar Committee and the Chair of COMNAP. I just wanted to say that what Nicole said about Germany is the same for most of the European countries. So you have absolutely direct access to the infrastructures immediately. In some countries, like in Germany, they ask you to attach to their own projects. But in others, like in Spain, you are not asked for that. So we are having, for instance, Canadian projects in our infrastructures without any connection with us. So we are open, and this is only 2 examples. But the other 25 members of the European Union, they do the same. And you have a fantastic document that is coming from EuPolarNet 2 about the infrastructure access to European assets. And you can find a huge diversity of possibilities, and it's always open for everyone. So any part of the world. So I think that it could be very useful for everyone.
Thank you. I was going to make a facetious comment, but maybe I should not. Any other thoughts or comments before we close out for the afternoon? Adelheid, please go ahead.
mentioned something about all these opportunities. Are they on certain websites or?
So you find these documents on the EU PolarNet website. There is a part which is called not deliver achievements, and there are all the downloadable documents. I recommend especially to read I'm getting old, but the catalog of European polar programs. There you see what they are doing, where they are working, the contact points, their infrastructure. In addition, we have produced another document which also shows that's a funding catalog, how they are funded and so on. But if you would like to get access to a European infrastructure, this document, the catalog on European polar programs, is the key, and it's all on EU PolarNet website.
Jenny's question prompted quite an exchange of information there, and we never did get to Anupma. So Anupma, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just getting so excited. Thank you so much to our international partners. You bring so much strength to everything we're doing. David already kind of spoke about the question I was going to ask, so I put my hand down, but I hear so much potential in networking and mobility. And as we think about the why, especially for a broader audience communication, one thing that I wanted to emphasize was we had these like beehive diagrams from the past. Some version of that will come out, or maybe there's a different version which sees what is something that's a common thread in connecting everything. And I do want to put the people in the middle of it. People are important, you mentioned that. And just really thinking about this next IPY also being about people.
I think that's so true, and I think we're on a very good path to achieve that. It's a priority for all of us. So two things. One is I'm open for bids on the summary of the IPY 2007-2008 by the ASSW WMO Joint Committee. Secondly, there's some examples in here of that evolution of that beehive diagram, and I almost think that we could develop that early on as a board game, right? That like, you start to fill it in and imagine using that as a template for what IPY could be, and we throw that out to the community and see what we end up with, because we're at the imagination stage right now. And if I can just say, the magic of the last IPY for me was before there was any money on the table. And we have all this discussion about funding and funders and, logistics. And we have a lot of the pieces already, and we'll find the glue to stick it all together eventually. But money does strange things to people, right? And while we have this open opportunity where we're not actually, we know we need funding to do things, but we don't have funding calls. It's not a competitive process anymore. This is the time when we can imagine what we want IPY to be. And that, centering people, centering, a better future for the planet that we share. Those are the things that probably we should invest our time in right now. So there may be ways, again, to use that experience from last time to achieve that. Eventually it'll get, be down to the nitty gritty of, can we afford to do this and things like that. But anyway, just my sort of closing thought on the whole thing, but I'm not leaving with this. So I want it to go to a good home, somewhere where it'll get good, well dog-eared and used by folks. I don't know who, maybe I'd stay out of it, but here it is.
Thank you, David. So apparently I'm the chair of this meeting. So I'll take the prerogative and have the last word and build on what Anupma and David have just said, but actually repeat myself, which I often do, and say, what could make this IPY very different from previous IPYs? And we need to be different. We can't just be another IPY that produces peer-reviewed papers in leading journals that only a few academics and government researchers pay any attention to. Let's make this IPY about people who need products and services and solutions that are based on use-inspired and action-oriented research. that would be a very different IPY. With that, I'd again like to thank our overseas guests. It's been great to have you here. It's great to see you, David and Henry again. Maria, it's very nice to meet you. Our paths may well cross a bit more in the future. To everybody who attended from outside the PRB, along the back wall or on Zoom, thank you too for joining. And though you may not have shared any ideas or had any questions, there are going to be many more opportunities to enter into what is a very important conversation as we build towards the next International Polar Year. So with that, it looks like 2:30 exactly. We are closed until we open again. Thank you.